is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the quarantine zone again. And this time we are here with the entirety of Ionophore. Thank you all so much for being here. It's an honor to speak with all of you today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about the brand new album, Knells, which is really, really mesmerizing and harmonizing. In case you couldn't tell by my review of it, I was really, really into the album and I was just jamming it again today. I really want to know what the thought process was behind the making of this album. Was there kind of like a preconceived idea? How did this album sort of like see the light of day?
Question. I wanted it to be preconceived. I don't know if it came out that way. I think there was sort of this preconceived idea of mine to strip things down and make it a little more acoustic than our previous albums, which are very sort of sonically dense and lots of electronics and how it goes when you're trying to mix like 40 tracks. So this was sort of like a way to kind of pull back on that. But like with all Ionophore albums, it's like, things evolve as we work on them. So things don't happen exactly as planned, and that's kind of the fun part of it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Layla kind of had the concept at the beginning of sort of more of a stripped down, maybe some more organic instrumentation. And then each of us, I think, kind of took that in a little bit of a different way and started pulling it. I mean, this is like Layla said, this is how all the albums are. Everybody kind of pushes and pulls it in sort of a unique way, and we sort of end up in the middle of where all of us are coming from. I mean, for me, I took that thought of kind of more organic and stripped down and kind of approached it from like, well, let's use organic instrument sources and keep some of those in, but then use those to kind of build some of these sort of textural ambient kind of pad-like things that we kind of like to play around with, but using kind of the source material as pretty much like either Layla's voice or acoustic guitar or violin or kind of whatever we were doing. So that's kind of the way that I interpreted some of that thought process. But I don't know, what do you think, Jan?
I think for the previous albums, we sort of recorded them as bits. Like if you sent something missing, you would just chuck another bit on. And that's when we got to those like 40 tracks per song, sort of mixed nightmare type of things. And so I think the idea for me was to, I guess, like write the part you wanted to write all along rather than kind of edge towards it with bit after bit. So yeah, that's what it meant to me. It's more simple, more sort of dedicated in a way.
What I'm curious about is because this music sounds so organic, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing that seems forced in it. It doesn't seem like is there a lot of improvising in the songwriting process, or is there like actually kind of like a lot of structural form that you think of, like this needs to go here, this has to go here? Is there like a theoretical element, or is there a lot of like improv involved in the songwriting process with Ionophore?
I think it's just we kind of put things on the page and then they all just move around organically and they move to fit. If someone we all sort of write in the same set. So if someone like puts a violin piece down, it might nudge the other bits around and then we'll kind of react to that. So it's kind of a constant process whereby we're reacting to what the other two have just done, I guess.
Yeah, I'm actually that's such an interesting question. I'm actually really curious to hear how everyone else answers it. I mean, for me, I think it's kind of both, especially for this album. I mean, there are definitely parts where you're like, I think this could use something, and then you kind of improvise and turn some knobs and record and loop and do crazy shit to kind of get to where you want. But then sometimes, especially for this album, there's more of an organic line, like a violin line or a guitar line, where like, this is what it needs. I'm gonna do like 40 takes of it until I get it exactly right. And so for me, I think it's kind of was both. I mean, I think songwriting in general is always kind of both. I mean, the first time you write it, you always improv it, right? So there's always kind of that element. But this album in particular was really kind of both of those in a way that was a little bit different, sort of from the kind of traditional ratio that we maybe use.
Yeah, and also, for people out there that don't know, we've been writing and recording albums almost since the beginning, remotely. So that process has always been built into our the way we do everything. And so there's this element of improv when we're working on stuff on our own, but then we can just go back and change it to tweak it how we want it to sound. And that process doesn't always happen when we're all together. Sometimes, because Jan's been in London for the past several years, and he and Ryan will get together every so often in person and just jam on some ideas. And those have been sort of the seedlings of our albums that they've, that have like sprung out of them. So that's, so there is that element of improv when they're getting together and laying down sort of, throwing paint at the wall and getting ideas out there. But then once we're working on everything on our own, I'll like, for example, take Ryan's violin part, chop it up, and write a melody that's composed. So that part of it is not improv, but then, in that same moment, I might spontaneously come up with a trumpet line that I'll just lay down right there. So like Ryan said, it's kind of both. And maybe for some releases, it's, higher or lower ratio.
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, so you were all writing stuff remotely and doing this distance stuff before it was even cool. Like, you predicted the future with this. And so already a band that's been ahead of their time. There you go, right there. And I know you guys are all spread out too. Like, you need a member from Australia or South America just to make it even
then we could
more.
get like better 24/7 coverage of songwriting that way, right? Just like pass it around time zone to time zone.
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. And then maybe see and have everybody play the same note on the same instrument, but see if the time zone like alters it in a way. Maybe a good
I
experimentation.
could get a grant for that probably.
Yeah. And it's funny too because you're right. Like, I thought that this album was very more acoustic driven and more I guess, for lack of better words, more atmospheric and a little bit more raw than what I've heard on an album such as Wetter, for example, which, I mean, there's a song on here, I think it's Fracture, if I'm wrong, that, like, really has kind of like a dance vibe behind it. It really, like, has almost kind of like something I would hear in, like, a really cool club or something like that. Like, I see many different atmospheres in Ionophore's music. One minute, I feel like I'm in a very Victorian setting, then something I feel like I'm in, like the wilderness in one aspect, I'm in a more metropolitan area in the other. Do you all maybe think of an atmosphere or a concept that you want to like address in the music verse, or is there kind of like maybe a concept in mind that could help influence the direction of the music in a way? Or do you maybe not have an idea of the meaning of the music until, after songs have already been written?
Yeah, I
Definitely
think
evolves.
Yeah. Both.
Yeah.
I don't think much of what we do is that premeditated. That, I don't know, maybe do you guys think differently about that?
Yeah, these are all such a great questions because for every question I'm like, I want to know what they think of this. I want to hear what they say. But I mean, yeah, I think like for each of the albums, we've had sort of a very broad idea of sort of sonically where we want to try and work. But that's about as far as it goes. I mean, I think the interesting thing about writing largely separately is when you pull up a track, you don't know what's happened since the last time you've heard it. And you're just kind of, it's like Jan mentioned, you're just kind of reacting to what you think it needs. And sometimes you'll spend a couple hours on like a subtle arrangement thing or a crossfade, and sometimes you'll track, three new parts. It just kind of depends on what you're hearing. And so, yeah, I agree with Layla. I don't feel it's super premeditated, aside from sort of some broad sort of guidelines, which then we don't adhere to if we don't think that that's what the song needs. And I mean, I think one of the things that's great about, we've all been working together for a long time, and we really all trust each other. And so, whatever they want to do to the track or to my recordings or whatever, that's what the song needs. Like there's kind of no ego really in this band, which is really nice. It's like, if that's what you think needed to happen and you needed to retrack my part, like I'm sure you're right. So with that, I think it really kind of opens up to whatever whatever the track needs, that the person is working on it, that's what the track gets.
Yeah, I guess they find their own voice as we write them. And I guess when we're starting a new album, we all try to say like, oh, let's each do 3 or 4 songs. Like, let's be the person that starts 3 or 4 each, and then see where that goes, so that you kind of have that seed of that one person, which maybe shapes the initial mood, and then maybe the next person like takes it in a different direction. And I guess with all our music, there's a bit of a push and a pull between the 3 of us, because we all have slightly different kind of styles.
I could tell. Like, it's funny too, because like I think if somebody were to really dive into the back catalog of all the projects that all 3 of you are involved in, not just with Ionophore, but with Vastum and Souls and Cities and Not Quiet So, and just to name a few, because there's so many different bands. Like, it almost seems like if somebody were to really dive into the projects you're outside of Ionophore and then listen to an Ionophore song, they'd be able to tell whose part is who. I think that really, I think it really is, Ionophore is really like a collaboration, I feel like, of many signature sounds.
Really cool. That's good to know. Nobody's
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you definitely bring things that you learn in one project to another project, which is part of the reason it's fun to play in different projects and also in different styles of projects, right? Because you learn little production tricks or performance tricks or writing tricks from working in one style. And like, oh, wait, what if I did that in Ionophore? Or something I learned in Ionophore, like, oh, what if I did that in one of my other projects? Like, there's definitely a cross-pollination that occurs for sure.
Mm-hmm. When it comes, because I feel like Ionophore's music really captures a moment. That's the way I really describe this material. It's not just making an atmosphere, but I feel like it really represents a moment in a way. Do you find though, maybe like, and I don't even know if this is a goal or even what you're thinking of with Ionophore, but do you think that maybe the longer you're working on a song, because sometimes you're working on a song for days, weeks, if you're Tool, 13 years, but like, so you're working on a song for a long period of time. Do you feel that maybe makes it a little bit harder to capture the emotional spark that first initiated the project to begin with?
There are definitely songs that we've written. I mean, this album we wrote over 18 months, maybe more. And some of them were like, this is what the song is. It's packaged up, it's in a box. We just need to tighten up a few bits. And then there are other ones that sort of take ages and ages, and they're kind of in the wilderness for 6 or 9 months, and we don't quite know where they're going. And then someone will just drop in a bit that kind of gives it a backbone, and we build it around that. So yeah, I don't know, they go in all different directions, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, there's always, the things that the tracks that just seem to just fall together, and it's like, this is what it needs, and then it's done. But then, some of them take a long time. But it's an interesting question that, if we were to map out, which songs we liked the most over which songs took the most or least amount of time, like, would there be any correlation between those two or not? It's a super interesting question. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it before, but what do you think, Layla?
Yeah, I think we've been getting, correct me if I'm wrong about this, I think we've been getting faster and faster at the whole process since the beginning, where things just seem to take a really long time. I think all of us, especially you two, have gotten so much better at engineering and mixing. And so since we're doing all that and the writing and the recording, it's like all those things together are taking less time because we've done so much with other releases and different configurations and different collaborations I mean, there's always going to be songs that take longer than others. Some are just like, they're almost ready to go off the bat. They're super simple. They just need like a couple of layers and they're basically done. We just have to mix them. And then others are just like, like there could be like 2 tracks, and there are 2 tracks I'm thinking of on Knells that basically took like a year to come together to the point where we were satisfied with them. But I think overall, like when I think about how long Centripools, our second album, came together, and then Wetter, our third album, I think those took longer than this one. But I don't know. Maybe I'm not remembering correctly.
Well,
I think longer in the wilderness, where they're kind of held together with string and you don't quite know what it's going to take to actually finish them off.
Well, what's funny is I've noticed with Knells that there was like a huge evolution, because like, you know, there's sometimes when a band creates an album, there's like an element of consistency or a certain vibe that they want to keep throughout it. But when you like starting off with Take Its Course to end with Contemplation and even Our Garden, and you know, you kind of like see how like the album kind of like grows in a way, like a real evolution. It is honestly, this listen is a journey. That's how I describe it. Like you start in one place and you end up in a completely different place. So it almost seems like you all were taking many different inspirations. Like I saw some remnants of Diminution, which is one reason why I was really excited to like hear this album again, because Diminution was an album I personally loved in 2018. And then, you know, like there was remnants from what we heard off of songs such as like Through the Light Fractures, or albums such as Through the Light Fractures or Centripools or something like that. It just seems like that there was a lot of different inspiration. Do you feel that maybe the projects that you experiment outside of Ionophore help influence Ionophore, or do you feel that they should or are normally separate entities?
I think they influence each other unconsciously. I think that's just something that happens when you work on a project, is all the other stuff that we're doing kind of makes its way in somehow. And it could be different things. There could be like, you know, the way that we approach certain textures or melodies. I mean, I can definitely see how someone would correlate this album more with Diminution than say our previous albums. So, and I think, I mean, the three of us, we play together in multiple projects. Ryan will play live with me for my solo project Material, and Ryan and Jan have their own project, Better Thief, and we all play on each other's solo albums. So it's, I think it's just like we're kind of just this collective that's like infinite. It just keeps branching out into these different configurations, and it's, you know, we do try to make them distinct, so it's not like you're hearing the same thing over and over again. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. Like I would say, Better Thief sounds nothing like Keep, sounds nothing like my stuff, sounds totally different from Souls and Cities. So it's, you know, I think we're kind of good at generating something new. But yeah, like there's always going to be stuff that filters through that we're not entirely conscious of.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely happened to me before too, where like I'll have some idea that I was writing for maybe one project, and then think like, you know what, this actually, if it went a different direction, this would be a better Ionophore track or something. And so sometimes it's, I mean, you know, part of the reason we started this band, because Jan and I were doing some more kind of like indie electronica stuff, and we wanted something like darker and dronier and kind of more ominous and experimental, because we wanted to do that stuff, but we still wanted to work on other types of music. And so, you know, I think, you know, everyone is kind of interested in different, I mean, you can be more different from, you know, like Layla's solo stuff to Vastum, right? Like, I mean, while there is some overlap for sure, like obviously very, very different types of music, but that's what's fun about being in different projects, is like you come up with an idea and it's like, oh, this is going to slot in really well here. But then also like, oh, what if, like, I mean, I think Vastum is a great example of, well, what if like you took some ambient and textural elements that Layla is really good at, that she, you know, really exemplifies in her solo stuff, and then put that kind of in the back of some of the Vastum tracks. And so I think kind of, again, this cross-pollination between projects is inevitable, but I also think it makes it super interesting and kind of hopefully adds some sort of uniqueness to each of the individual projects.
Mm-hmm. I guess one thing we should maybe try is taking one song and like adapting it for each of like the 7 or 8 bands that we're all in.
That would actually be really fun. And then release that as an album, like as a
like a mega supergroup cross compilation greatest hits.
Ooh, we should talk about that. Actually, I think that'd be a super interesting idea.
That's a great idea. And all the bands that Liz and Dave work with, it always seems like they do kind of like play on projects as well. Like I've always noticed like cross references and like, you know, oh, that member also played in this band. Oh, it makes sense. Oh, and then this band works with this band. It's the ear split way, as I say it.
Totally. I just found out that I'm on an album with you, Alex. So that's really cool.
Yep, it's a small
player.
world. Ear split. Using music to bring people together, to make friends that we didn't even know that we had, or to find bands that we didn't know we had. So, it's really, really exciting and an honor as well. And do you feel that, like, is there kind of like a usual method behind the madness, so that applies to all of the creative outlets that you have, whether it is with Ionophore or Vastum, or, you know, stuff that we heard off of Diminution, or Better Thief or something like that? Is it almost like, is there a similar method behind the madness, or do you feel that like when you're playing with a different project, you do have to kind of like change the creative process in a certain way, or being that you all collaborate together, it kind of makes them very similar?
I think the different bands have their own creative process, and that's why they're different bands. You know, like there are things I do on my own like Keep project that, you know, I just know I can work like that by myself, and then I'll kind of switch mode and be Ionophore, and it's a slightly different vibe, slightly different way of working. I could like throw ideas into the mix, but they wouldn't quite work because, you know, the vibe isn't right. So I think they each have their different working process, but the influences are kind of the same.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they're kind of different. I mean, like for mine and Jan's project, like we kind of made some conscious decisions about wanting to have a different workflow, so that it didn't, because like Layla mentioned, we all plan each other's solo albums, right? And so when Jan and I started our project, we didn't want it to sound like songs, you know, my solo projects that he was playing on, and then his solo projects that I was playing on. We wanted it to sound like something we did together. And so we kind of experimented and evolved into sort of a different sort of writing process to make sure that that would happen. I mean, I think Ionophore has been pretty organic, the way that it's sort of evolved. Even pretty early, we kind of decided like we wanted to be really kind of egalitarian in the way that we approached songwriting and writing and production, because everyone's multi-instrumentalist and knows, you know, production and engineering. So I think that was very kind of by definition. And as Layla mentioned from the beginning, we were kind of writing separate, recording separately. So I mean, I think each project is sort of different and kind of has to be different because you work differently with different people or with different collections of people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's completely different for me for every project. Like right now, Vastum's trying to write a new album, and we're really learning how to do the remote writing thing. And we've never done it before. It's like we've always been in a room together with the drummer, and that's how things have always come together. And now that we can't do that, it's like, well, we're trying to figure out how to patch all these different riffs together, and when we're going to work on them together, we don't know. So we're kind of like learning as we're going. And then likewise for my solo project, I do everything ass backwards to how Ionophore and all of Jan and Ryan's projects work, because I don't know. I don't necessarily, and then especially like how I write in Ionophore, or how the three of us come up with ideas. They're sort of like these ideas that we throw down, and then we keep shaping and shaping and shaping. But how I might approach a solo album would be like, I know what the artwork looks like. I know what the title of the album is going to be before I write a single note. And then I dream what the song is going to be. And I get up and I lay down a trumpet track that was like rolling around in my head. And so it's completely different for me. That's the long and the short of it.
Wow, it's really interesting on how you have these different experiences and then you bring it into Ionophore, and I see snippets of other projects into it, but it's like I still know it's you three, but at the same time it's like expressing a different side of yourself, and that led me into my next question. I have two more for you, but like, do you feel like that with the Ionophore catalog, whether it is Centerpulse or Wetter or even Knells, the new album, is it almost kind of like a representation or maybe like a self-portrait of who the three of you are at that particular time, or has music always been kind of like a means of escape, maybe portraying something that maybe you're not in your daily life, or maybe you know being an extension outward from your own personal being, or is again these albums more or less kind of like self-portraits of representations of who you personally are?
Wow.
A tricky one.
Yeah, that's a super interesting question.
With Ionophore, I don't know. I think it's all fantasy for me. Like, there's parts of me in there somewhere, but they're so disguised. And like, since I'm the only one writing lyrics, like I'll tell you, the lyrics are just like stream of consciousness. Like, oftentimes the lyrics are like, I don't know what they are till I hit the record button. And I'm just jotting them down as I'm singing. It's not a very premeditated thing. And there's always a part of me that gets in the lyrics, but I don't know, with Ionophore, I think it's like I'm pretty like I'm this sort of fabricated identity that's not necessarily the reality. Maybe you guys, maybe it's different for you guys. I don't know. We never talked about this before.
Yeah, I know. Actually, they're super interesting. I feel like we all know each other better after this. The next album is going to be super weird.
Oh,
it's going to be like the therapy album.
Oh wow! I mean, man, that's an extraordinary honor. If I was an influence for the making of the next album.
What do you think, Jan?
I don't know. I mean, each time we decide to write a new album, to me, I arrive at it and I think, what am I doing now? What am I bored of doing? What am I excited to do? I'm just going to shoehorn what I'm excited to do into what this next album is. And it's usually compatible in some way. Like for Wetter, it was kind of density and synths and kind of parameters of electronic, like automation. And for this one, it was much more stripped back, like make something less sonically broad that just sits in a hole and like says what it needs to say without taking up too much space. So I guess that's how I'm guided. I just want to try something new each time and see what works and what doesn't.
But do you think it reflects who you are as a person?
Someone with itchy feet, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because I always read these, and Jan and I have talked about this a bunch. You read these kind of grandiose artist statements and people have these really interesting, objective, sort of, self-aware artistic interpretations that they're translating into their music. And I just don't
Ryan, don't compromise it. We might need to write these soon.
I know. I can write it. We can make it up after, right? No, okay. I mean, for me, it's like, I think they're like inevitably, you kind of really don't understand where it's coming from, right? I mean, like you're playing what you feel like you want to play, what you're excited about playing, like Jan mentioned. So like, musically, it's a representation of who you are at the time. But like where you are in your life and who you are as a person, I'm sure that finds an expression there, but how those two things are connected for me has never been clear. I go back and listen to things and bands that I've done and parts that I've written and projects that I've been in. And you can hear things changing as you change as you're a musician, but you're also changing as a person. But I've never been really, and I'm just not smart or self-aware enough to be able to connect the dots, but I've never been able to really sort of like, oh, this is about this because I was struggling with this and this translated into this. Like for me, it hasn't worked that way. And there may be a point where it does, but it doesn't really work that way for me. But I'm always super fascinated by people that it does because it's a little bit of a foreign concept to me. I mean, it's because, you know, I'm a scientist and I'm too analytical. I'm like, this song needs this to make sense, but there's also, when you're writing a song, it's like, well, there's the emotive component of the song. Like, what does this song need, you know, emotionally to be a complete piece of art, like in this arc that we're building in this sonic landscape? So I don't know, like I understand how that can work with people, but I'm not particularly aware of how it works for me, I guess, which I also think is kind of interesting.
I think because like the three of us were, we all were really good friends, and we're all like such different people, that what happens when you've been working together for such a long period of time is like there's like this fourth entity, there's like this fourth like group persona. It's kind of like it's kind of like in psychoanalysis they talk about the analytic third, which is sort of this composite being of the analyst and the patient. And it's, I think there's something similar to that happening with us, but it's like it's like we're all so different, and the way we merge together is like this whole other like fantastical being that and I think that comes out artistically.
And that led me perfectly into the final question, actually, because this is a question maybe for each individual in terms of just your songwriting process in general. Does inspiration from songwriting, does it sometimes strike when you least expect it, or do you kind of have like a place or a mood that you need to be in, or some sort of realm that you dive into in order to get into that creative process? Because sometimes, you know, you feel that creative urgency, you feel the need to want to create. You may not know what it might be, but you just feel the creative energy surging that leads you into creating something. And so therefore, you know, you go to your usual studio or whatever place you usually work at and just start to work. Or like, does ideas sometimes strike when you least expect it? I've heard sometimes ideas strike at very inconvenient times as well.
Well, I guess for me, like I tend to write something, then listen to it while I'm, well, commuting in the good old days when I used to commute, or like walking the dog. And I'll literally be like, oh, that's what it needs. I'm going to go home and do that thing. Whereas if I just sit in front of the computer and think I'm going to write, then I just tend to write bilge, and it's, you know, I'll just write set after set of stuff that I'll never listen to again. So for me, it's very much I write when I'm not able to act upon it, which is quite frustrating, but that's the way it is, I think.
It happens.
We're going to go, Layla. I mean, I wish I had a better handle on it. I mean, there's times when I sit down and I think I want to write something, or I need to, you know, it's my turn on this Ionophore track and everyone's waiting for me and I can't come up with it. And like I sit down and I can't do anything. And then sometimes I sit down like, I just want to play guitar or play piano or something. And then all of a sudden, like 30 seconds in, you're like, oh, wait a minute. And then you get super excited. And then like 4 hours later, you have like this crazy thing. And so it doesn't strike at convenient times, I would agree. Like I wish I had a better handle on like being able to understand like, what can I do to make it so when I have time and I need to do something, I can do it. But it just kind of, it's like I was saying earlier, like no one really understands it super well. It's just when it hits, right? And so you just have to hopefully like, I mean, yeah, have I like sung parts on my phone because I'm like, all of a sudden I'm hearing something in my head. Like, yeah, like the stuff that Jan is talking about, I think is super helpful. I'll do that too. Like I'll put something on loop and then I'll just like go do the dishes or something, and just like hearing it over and over while not trying to write on it lets you write on it sometimes. So, I mean, I think you try different exercises, but yeah, I certainly don't understand how it works well enough to control it particularly well.
I think for me, there's a headspace I need to be in. I don't know about so much for Ionophore because I'm usually the person that adds to stuff instead of starting the stuff. I know for my solo project, I know like early in the morning and late at night are really like my most inspiring times of day to get in that creative headspace for a number of reasons. It could be, you know, the way the lighting looks a particular morning, or I had a particular dream that was sort of getting the creative ball rolling. And but I think for Ionophore, it's like what these guys are coming up with. You know, we have a very strong chemistry. So if you haven't noticed, I mean, we've done so much over the past 8 years. It's like I have a way of responding to what Ryan and Jan will throw down on a track that's almost spontaneous. Like most of the time, those are the songs that seem to come together the fastest. Like if I listen to like a drone that they come up with, or you know, it could be like a drone or a violin part or a beat, and I'll be like, oh my god, I know exactly what style vocal, what you know, trumpet melody. That's sort of what happens. But yeah, in terms of me instigating the creative process, I do have to be in a sort of the right state of mind, and that tends to be early in the morning and late at night. So,
well, there was kind of like a part 2 to this question, because this is the most difficult question of the whole interview, the last part. I want all 3 of you to answer this, and I guarantee that the first portion of answering this question is going to be you pointing who goes first with this. So I look forward to this.
Oh no.
Most difficult question of the interview. How do you know when a song is done?
Oh, easy. We can't bear to listen to it anymore.
Wow, okay. That was an original answer. I'm glad you didn't give me the good old, oh, you just abandoned the song. Like, I'm running out of space of tally marks on how many times I get that answer. So that was a good one. That was a good one.
I guess we tend to mix and write at the same time. So we're sort of, if the mix isn't feeling quite right, you might write a new bit that kind of sits, you know, in that mix space a bit better. And I think there comes a point where we're like, this is it. It's not going to be better than this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, there comes a point where, like, once, you know, we've decided and the structure is kind of locked in, and then we're filling in parts, then there gets to the point where instead of like working on this section that you know you wanted to spend some time on, or on this specific transition, like, well, I'm going to listen to it from the beginning and see how far I get. And sometimes you get, you know, 7 seconds in, and then you spend the next 3 hours, you know, on that part. There gets to the point where it's like, I just made it through the whole track, and like, there's nothing else. There's nothing that I'm hearing that it's like something's lacking or something needs adjustment. Like, once you can make it all the way through the track, it's like, well, I mean, if you're not hearing anything that needs to be changed, then the track's done. And I mean, and you know, we talked about earlier, sometimes that happens pretty quickly. Sometimes it takes a long, painful time. And then, you know, mixing starts, which is a whole nother set of painful, you know, parts of it. But I guess that's how I can tell, like, if you don't have to stop and work on something, then the track's done.
Yeah, it kind of has that character of, this is what the song is, and this is what it's saying, and it says all the parts it needs to say, like, forcefully enough, then it comes a point where you're not going to make it better.
And the kind of that focus broadens, right? Because you work at first, it's like, this tone or this mix or this part, and then you start to broaden out. It's like, oh, this structure, like, is this section too long or too short? And then, you know, it's kind of like this songwriting problem, like troubleshooting in a way, right? Where like, oh, there are these little problem areas, and then eventually you just sort of smooth out all these problems. And then once, I don't know, maybe that's like a negative way to look at it. When there's no more problems, the song is done. But I guess that's kind of how I think about it.
I think there's something in your body that, like, everything is sitting right when you listen to a song, and there's nothing in your body that's like, ugh, that's happening.
Yeah.
That's one way. Another way is that I know that Ryan and Jan aren't like adding more negative comments to a song. Then I'm pretty confident it's ready to go. One thing that I like to do is like bounce out rough mixes of the whole album and listen to all of it together, because I like to listen to an album as a whole and not just necessarily track by track. If I'm deciding, okay, this is done, I think it all needs to be listened together, because you might hear something in the bird's eye view that you don't notice in the micro view. So I think that's something I do with everything that I'm co-producing or
I think that's really cool. Like that's definitely like a level of artistic vision that I'm not very good at having, that I think Layla is super good at having, is kind of this like broader sort of artistic, like, and also, you know, like even more like things like track order, like Layla is just way better. I'm like, I don't know. It's a bunch of stuff I don't want to listen to anymore. But Layla is like has this like broader kind of artistic understanding of how it should fit together. And I mean, the fact that you mentioned earlier, you know, like this album feels like it goes through this evolution. Like it's largely, I mean, like because Layla has this broader sort of understanding about it than I sometimes I have a hard time doing.
I feel like the best way to describe Ionophore is the combination of art, science, and philosophy. That's my conclusion on Ionophore after doing this interview, because it really seems like you have a very analytical, scientific, you know, very formalistic way of analyzing things, but then you also are able to kind of like examine it from a deeper place that maybe you aren't going to see with the naked eye or hear with the naked ear. I feel like really the three of you making music together is definitely a match made in musical heaven, and really this interview is my overarching conclusion on that. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's good. It's yeah, good to hear, and I think very accurate to hear it stated out loud.
Thank you.
I think it definitely does come from the fact we all kind of do everything. Like we all mix a bit, we all write a bit. We can all, like with notable exceptions of like the violin and the vocals, we can all sort of write every piece almost. So it has that very egalitarian feel to it, and like no one's precious about their parts being massaged or chopped up by someone else, because I guess we all have that trust that it's going to work out.
Yeah, and all three of you do a really good, have a really good very good perceptions on your own work. Because, you know, I've interviewed plenty of bands where, you know, there's one guy who writes all the material, and then, you know, there's one member who either just has to learn the part or maybe just contributes a solo to it or something. But it seems like all three of you have your own points of view on music, you know, as it's seen through all of your projects outside of Ionophore, and then you take those experiences and all collaborate together. I think that this is a really, really unique project that more people are going to hear, and I really am looking forward to, you know, showing more people Ionophore and explaining like about your songwriting process, because this is a very unique interview. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, super fun. Yeah, great questions.
Thank you. So before we go, is there just anything else with Ionophore that you would like to promote? Obviously, thanks to a certain virus that's not being named on my outlet, because I don't like to give, you know, the antagonist any publicity. But is there just anything like that you would like to promote for Ionophore? Maybe like some new music in the works, or any of your other projects as well that you would like to plug for new music, or a live stream performance, or live performances in general when music does return?
I have a new soul album coming out this year on Cyclic Law. It's a co-release with Cloister, who released Diminution. That'll be out on vinyl and CD and digital sometime in the next couple months. I haven't been given a release date, but that's the next big thing in the works for me, and working on the new Vastum album.
Yeah, I released an album with my band Not Quite So on Wormhole World Records back in December. So that's been fun. That's kind of new and doing the rounds in the minute.
Any new Keith?
That's very much in development.
Jan and I, our project Better Thief, we have a live album we actually tracked when I was in London, I guess a couple of years ago now, that will be coming out pretty shortly when we get around to finishing it. I have another solo. I released a solo album under Souls and Cities, my solo project, a few months ago, and I have another one that will be coming out probably in spring, as soon as I get around to kind of wrapping that up as well. Mm-hmm. And then Ionophore, now that this is out, we need to, we'll start talking about what to do next.
And I look forward to whatever that may be.
With.
But thank you all so much. Everybody, we are here with Ionophore. Be sure to check out Knells if you haven't already. This is Alex from Heavy New York. We will see you next time.